Of course, we have no idea what tax rates are going to do in the future, but there's a lot of expectation that they will be going up. We don't know when that might happen, but it does bring up the question whether or not it's a good idea to start selling some investments now to take advantage of rates currently before they do possibly increase. We'll ask John that question coming up next. Hello and welcome in to Mr. Stillman's Opus. Glad to have you on the YouTube channel. Once again, I am Ben George with John Stillman over at Rosewood Wealth Management. John, I know you can't predict where tax rates are going. No one can, but I think the anticipation is that rates will go up again at some point in the future.
Pretty safe bet. The way we spend money as a country and the fact that tax rates dropped back in 2017 from relatively historically low rates to certainly historically low rates here, what we've had the last 7 years. They have to go up. Mathematically, they have to go up. Now, we already know that the Tax Cut and Job Act from 2017, that was the Trump tax bill, essentially, that cut the rates really across the board. Those are going to sunset at the end of 2025. So we know rates are already scheduled to go back up in 2026, unless Congress extends the current tax code, which I kind of doubt they'll do. So we have a built-in raise in the rates coming in 2026, and then where they go beyond that, anybody's guess.
Well, here's the question I want to explore with you today is that, with the anticipation that's going to happen with rates probably going up, or let's just say we want to be prepared for that. Should I consider selling my non-IRA investments now and pay those capital gains while they're still lower instead of later on when they jump up?
Yeah. So we've had a lot of people asking about that because I've been harping so much on, tax rates are actually low right now. Let's think about some ways we can proactively pay some taxes now instead of paying them later, which is really counterintuitive for a lot of people to voluntarily pay taxes now that you don't have to pay. But I'm not interested in getting your tax bill as low as possible this year. I want to get your tax bill as low as possible over the course of your lifetime. And if that means you pay a little more in taxes this year, well, that often is a good plan. And so we've had a lot of people asking, well, should I be selling some of this? Like I have had Apple stock since 1993, and it's done nothing but go up since then. Should I sell it now? Just go ahead and take the capital gains hit and, go from there. I still like Apple stock, but should I sell it and realize some of those gains? I've had people asking questions like that. What's the answer, Ben? It's going to blow you away that this is the answer, but It depends, right? Really depends on your situation. Depends on the income bracket that you're in right now. Does it make sense to realize some of these gains? If you've got some kind of weird year where your income this year is going to be a lot lower than it traditionally is, okay, yeah, maybe it is a good year to sell some stocks and realize some gains. If you're in a situation where your income is going to be a lot higher than usual this year, maybe it's a bad time to do that. Like what would be an example? It could be like if you have a commission type of job and you just know that this year you're going to get paid out a lot more than you normally do because you had a big sales year. Maybe it's not a great time to do it. Or maybe you're retiring this year. You're going to retire in November and you have 7 months worth of PTO that they have to pay you out in your final check. Well, you're going to have 11 months of work and then 7 more months of pay that's going to come in this year. Well, that's going to be a big tax year for you. Let's not be creating any more taxes than we have to, probably. Maybe a future year is going to be a better time. So we have to think through the specifics of your situation like that. But bigger picture, not thinking specifically about your situation, but just thinking about the tools that are available to us for appreciated stock. We really need to be aware of some of those tax planning tools, and a lot of them revolve around charitable giving, but not necessarily all of them. But I'll give you a couple of examples on the charitable giving front. And you might have people that say, well, I'm not very charitably inclined. And then I say, okay, well, let's suppose that you died with $1 million. And if you did nothing, if you just continued doing what you're doing now, the government would get 40% of that, and your kids or your beneficiaries would get 60% of that. That's if you made no changes. 40% to the government, 60% to your kids. Or what if we put some things in place where your kids now get 70% instead of 60%. And then some charities get 10%. And now the government only gets 20%. Your kids got more, the government got less. You did have to give 10% away to charity, but that came out of the government's cut, and your kids got more because of the way we structured it. Oh, yeah, well, that sounds good. Well, congratulations. You are now charitably inclined. So there are some strategies we want to be aware of on that front. Here's an example. Let's use that Apple stock example.
Okay.
Let's say somebody bought Apple for $10 a share. And it's now at, I don't even know. Ben, let's look it up. Where is Apple stock right now? Let's do this.
190.
190. Great. Way on. You're more on top of them. You have more screens available, probably. So let's just round it up and call it 200 to make it easier, right? So they bought it for 10 and it's now worth 200. That means they have $190 of capital gains on each share. Okay. If I sell 100 shares, that's what, $19,000 of capital gains that I'm going to then be taxed on. What if you say, well, I really like Apple. I want to continue to hold Apple, but I know that if it keeps going up, those unrealized capital gains are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So what do? Rock in a hard place, right? I like the stock. I want to keep it, but I also don't want my gains to just keep growing forever. What if you donate some number of those shares of stock to a charity? Let's say you donated 20 shares of Apple to a charity of your choice. Now, this might be a charity that you were going to give cash to instead. But instead of writing the check, you're going to give them the corresponding shares of stock that equal the dollar amount that you would have given to them instead. Okay. So we're going to give them the shares of stock. Now they sell the shares. They don't pay taxes because they're a charity. You don't pay taxes because you didn't sell the stock. You never realized the capital gain. You gave it to a charity. You didn't sell it. You donated it. So you still get that tax write-off. And now that check that you were going to write to the charity, now you just take that money and you buy more Apple stock. You buy the shares to replace what you just gave away. Well, what have we done in the process? We've raised your cost basis, right? Your cost basis was at $10 a share. You donate those shares, you buy the same number of shares back, but now you're buying it at today's price.
Yeah.
So now, if it continues to go up down the road and you sell, well, now your cost basis is $190 a share, not 10. You follow that? So it feels like we accomplished nothing, right? We still have the same number of shares of Apple that we had before. The charity got the same amount of money you were going to give them before. All that's the same, but now your cost basis in that stock is a lot higher. So there are a lot of little tricks like that we can do. That's just one of maybe 5 or 6 different things around the charitable giving world that we can do to help deal with some of these capital gains when you've had stuff for a long time. I mean, I've seen it, examples like that where people have had one particular stock for 20 or 30 years. I have a guy who actually has had Apple since the 80s.
Wow.
I think it was maybe less than $1 a share when he got it. So he's sitting on, north of $1 million of Apple stock. That's
all gains almost too.
All gains. And it's, out of a $2 million portfolio, half of his wealth is in Apple. That's too much. But he hasn't wanted to sell because of those gains. So it's little tricks like this that we can do to try to mitigate some of that. So again, that's one example of 5 or 6 different ways to approach this problem. It's not as simple as, well, I think taxes are going to go up. I'm just going to sell some right now. Maybe that's the best bet, but it's at least worth a conversation to see, is there a more tax efficient way to approach that? Yeah,
that's really interesting. And just there's the creative ways you can go about getting to where you want to be. And I know a lot of us are short-sighted. Hey, the taxes are going to impact me now. They're going to impact me when I file next year. What can I do now to improve that? But again, your process is to give you the best outcome over the long haul. Does this change at all, John, this discussion change at all? If the capital gains we've heard, some speculation or some thought about capital gains taxes specifically going up. Would that conversation change at all if we knew in next year or in a couple of years capital gains taxes were going to go up to a much significantly higher percentage?
Well, if anything, it makes these strategies that much more important at that point, right? Because now, if we're at 18% capital gains right now, if it's going to be 25% or 35%, or maybe even higher than that, because with a lot of people, especially on the left of the political spectrum, they want to tax wealth, right? And so what's a good way to do that is to tax capital gains. Poor people don't own stocks. So their definition of rich is going to be met by people who have investments like this. So it's a way of quote unquote taxing the rich is by increasing capital gains tax. So that mindset certainly exists with a lot of people out there. So I think it's realistic to think that capital gains tax could go up. And again, it's going to make these strategies that much more important to think about.
All right. Well, if you want to sit down with John and talk about your portfolio, look ahead to what tax implications you might have in retirement, you can always go to meetwithjohn.com, meetwithjohn.com, and set up a time that will work for you. And I guess this is just one part of the overall discussion you'll have with someone when they first sit down with you, John.
Yeah, big part of it. And we get really specific on a lot of tax planning strategies that I think people probably don't get a lot of other places. So that's one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about.
All right. Learn more about Rosewood Wealth also at rosewoodwealthmanagement.com. And you can always call or text 800-545-2991. All right. Plenty of tax talk, John. I've enjoyed it. I did like the creative strategies. A lot of things to think about. So kind of thanks for taking us through that a little bit more. And of course, if you have any further questions or want to get deeper into some of these different strategies, again, reach out to John. Appreciate it, John.
Absolutely.
Carolina Wealth Stewards doing business as Rosewood Wealth Management is a registered investment advisor in the state of North Carolina. The material presented is intended to be general information and should not be construed by any consumer as the rendering of personalized investment advice.